this album and Hermitage, my previous record, are very Stratford-centric. This record feels a little more wistful, a little more introspective.
Reflective of where you've been, yeah.
I mean, I wasn't even old enough to be in a bar, so I had to get permission from the government.
So tell me about the Stratford inspiration and the Stratford connection to the album, even the name.
Yeah. Well, when we first, I think the first time when we'd rented the big moving van and we were coming here, we had, it took us about 3 trips to move all our stuff from Toronto into this house. And I kept noticing this street called the Vivian line, this rural route. And I was like, Vivian line, that's interesting. And I remember looking even online and couldn't find any information. I talked to people. And this was, again, 2017, so I didn't know I was going to make this record or anything. And so when it came time to, when I was putting these songs together, I just, it just sort of occurred to me, it's like this album and Hermitage, my previous record, are very Stratford-centric. It's all about my new life, and the Vivian line for me kind of represented a sort of portal, from, my old life in Toronto to my new one. Because whenever we came here, we always ended up on the Vivian line, and when we hit the road, we got on the Vivian line and it dumps us out on the main road or whatever. So it just sort of became this sort of metaphor. But then it's funny because a friend of ours who lives in town just randomly sent us all this information. I don't know where I think she went to the library maybe, but Vivian was the daughter of a kind of a landowner here at one point from I guess the 1800s or whatever. And she was apparently the first woman school bus driver in this neck of the woods. And she just passed away actually this past November. I wish I would have known before, but so it seems even more fitting now as a tribute. I wish, someone would have told her beforehand, but so it just became, I always like to pick a song or an album title that's not named after one of the songs on the record, because otherwise people think, oh, that's the important song or whatever. So I try to think of something that's a bit more mysterious, and the Vivian line just, I don't know, it just sort of always intrigued me.
Now, all of your past work, Ron, has been noted for its soulfulness, its spirituality, its deep thinking. But looking at what I've seen of this album so far, have you entered a more optimistic phase? Because there's a bit of gratefulness, like Diamond Wave, When Our Love Was New. Do you think coming to Stratford has pushed you onto kind of a plateau where you're more thankful in your life than you might have been before?
I think so. I mean, even like again with my previous album, Hermitage, that was a very kind of romantic album, very upbeat lyrically, because I was kind of amazed to find myself in such a happy new phase. And this record is kind of an extension of that, although it's not as, the last album I had a goofy album cover where I have a feather boa and all that stuff. This record feels a little more wistful, a little more introspective.
Reflective of where you've been, yeah.
Yeah, and maybe even, I'm just trying to, looking back on my childhood, like in Powder Blue, but definitely romantic songs like When Our Love Was New. But even that is kind of wistful because I'm looking at almost in the rearview mirror in a way, wow, look how we sort of fit a lot of living into this, like we've been together over 20 years, and you think about all the tours we've done and just all that, and so that's a big component. And even the song What I Had in Mind, which was the first single, is kind of about my childhood and how I kind of struggled in school and my prospects weren't super great, but that it ultimately worked out. So by the last verse you get a sense, actually it has the line, the Vivian line in that song, as we're heading out on the road again. So so it's very much about where I'm at now and looking back a bit. So.
And it's interesting, most artists, when they do a music video, they put themselves on camera.
Yeah.
But you've explored another medium for this particular album. Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, when I was on the major labels in the 90s, you were under contract. You had to do 2 videos for albums, and I hated doing them. Even when I was younger and thinner and all this stuff, I still didn't like... I just felt I couldn't rise to the occasion. Like I really got to hand it to people who are great in videos who really come to life. I would get really I would feel really awkward. But then there came a point where the labels wouldn't pay for videos anymore, and I was kind of relieved. But then they became the era of this, what they call the lyric video. So every time you had a single, some guy at the label in the art department would do this video, just of random footage of things with the lyrics. And I thought, okay, that's cool. I don't need to be in it. But now we stumbled upon this fellow named C.J. Wallace who he approached us and said, hey, I'm a fan. I'm a filmmaker. I'd love to, work with you. And we said, well, there's no budget for you to, and he didn't even seem to mind. So for this album, for the first time ever, he's doing 4 videos. And when they're all done, it's gonna make up one short film that he's gonna apparently enter in some film festivals. And so we're really, they're all animated and they're kind of, a bit quirky. And the last one was actually quite touching. So I'm really curious to know what the 4th and final video is going to be, because I don't have any input in it at all. I just wait for him to send it to me.
He uses your music and you put something together.
Yeah. But we're really grateful for him. We're hoping at the end of the day we'll be able to give him some kind of money for his efforts, because it's a lot of work.
Yeah, they're very interesting. Well, let's go back. You were talking about how this album is inspired by your reflective mood of your childhood in St. Catharines. Let's go back to your childhood, because it was a while before you ended up going to Toronto. And tell us about when you first picked up that guitar. And I believe you played at a tavern in Port Colborne or Port Dalhousie?
Port Dalhousie.
Port Dalhousie, yeah.
I always loved to sing, from a very early age. And... and I, like a lot of kids, I thought, oh, it would be great to do this for a living, but it didn't seem like possible coming, I don't know, from St. Catharines, so when it got up into high school, I was really, I tried all the shop programs. I wasn't good at that. Around that time, I had some buddies who, one week we'd want to be detectives, the next week we'd want to be in a rock band, every week. And so we started messing around. We had these really cheap instruments, and I got sort of stuck on guitar. I was never interested in the guitar. My favorite instrument is the piano, but I got sort of guilted into it. And so by the time I got out of high school, I graduated in 81, I was sort of good enough where I knew the basic chords, but I didn't know what I was going to do after school. I didn't have any plans to go to college or anything. So my older brother, Don, recommended he was playing in a band himself at this place called the Lions Tavern. He got me an audition there. And he said, if you're going to play here, you got to learn Beatles, Neil Diamond, and all that stuff. So I did. I would take albums up from the library and learn sort of all the hits. And, I wasn't even old enough to be in a bar. So I had to get permission from the government, a little letter. And when I wasn't on stage, I had to go sit in a room by myself and wait. And I did 4 sets, so they would come knock on the door. Okay, Ron, we're ready for you. Obviously they sort of loosened up after a while, but they became very protective of me, the patrons, because I was like this little kid, and they'd sneak me drinks when I was underage. If the cops came, they would sort of hide me and all that kind of stuff. So that was a great learning experience for me.
And that's in St. Catharines. You started your family and then moved to Toronto. Is that the order of things?
Well, what happened was, from that experience, I started to, try to think, well, how do I make a career out of this other than playing bars? And I wanted to make a demo, so I went tree planting because I heard you could make a lot of money. It was very hard work, tree planting. I hated it.
Out in BC or Northern Ontario?
Northern Ontario. Yeah. And but while I was there, I ended up meeting a girl and getting her pregnant. So which sort of was a curveball to my life, because all of a sudden I thought, well, how am I supposed to have a music career now? But having my son was what made me a songwriter, because I started writing my first songs literally weeks after he was born, because I had all the upheaval. I wrote a song called Speak with the Angel. This was like 1985. Didn't even think very much of the song, but that song ultimately would get my publishing deal, then my record deal years later. So that all was coming together. And when it was in Quebec, we were living in a barn, literally, outside of Three Rivers, where I started telling my former partner, I think I'm a songwriter. I think we got to go to Toronto and try to make this work, because I didn't know what else I was supposed to do. So, and that was, like I say, 85, and we didn't actually make it to Toronto until 87, because we had to, went back to St. Catharines and worked for a bit, tried to raise money. I think back on it now, it was just ridiculous, like insane, going to Toronto. You know, I worked as a courier, and then every night I had to go out and try to make connections and play the, you know, the open stages, and then get up and work the next day. So it was a lot of hard work, but I was stubborn. I had a vision, and I had a dream, you know. So.